My name is Lila West, and I live in America. I often tell people that my life truly began on a quiet road called Alder Lane, though the truth is that it began the day my parents left me. I was only 19 when they packed their bags, took the savings account I had helped them fill, and vanished from our small apartment in Hartfield, Vermont. They left no note, no call, no goodbye. Only silence and a few unpaid bills. I still remember sitting on the edge of that empty couch, watching the shadows crawl across the wall, feeling as if the world had cracked open and swallowed every bit of comfort I had known. That was the night I decided never to depend on anyone again. I had nowhere to go but one faint memory: my mother's older brother, Uncle Rupert Hale, a man my parents spoke of with mixed tones of respect and fear. They said he was strange, secretive, a man who trusted numbers more than people. I remembered visiting his house once when I was 10, a gray stone mansion sitting alone on a hill in Providence, Rhode Island, surrounded by iron gates and tall oak trees that bent with the wind. I remember the smell of cedar and rain in the corridors, the echo of my footsteps on the marble floor. Back then, I was too young to understand the weight of that house, but 15 years later, I returned to it with nothing but an old suitcase and a heart that refused to break again. When I arrived, the gates creaked open as if recognizing me. I walked up the long gravel drive to find Uncle Rupert standing at the top of the steps, his sharp eyes scanning me like he could read every thought I had ever had. He was older than I remembered, his silver hair combed neatly back, his cane resting beside him. He didn't smile, but there was a certain kindness in his silence. "Your parents left you?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied. He nodded once, turned toward the heavy oak door, and said, "Then you will stay here." From that day on, the house on Alder Lane became my world. It was enormous, 4 floors high, with wide hallways and staircases that groaned under each step. The windows were tall and narrow, draped with velvet curtains that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I was given a small attic room overlooking the river that curled like a ribbon below the hill. The nights were cold, and sometimes I could hear the wind moan through the cracks in the walls, but I grew to love the sound. It made me feel like the house was breathing with me, alive and old and strong. Uncle Rupert was a man of habit. He woke at dawn, ate breakfast at 6, read the Providence Journal, and spent the day in his study surrounded by ledgers, old maps, and shelves of leather-bound books. My job was to keep the house running. I dusted every frame, swept the floors, polished the silver, and made sure the guards stayed fed and paid. There were 2 of them, Marcus Owen and Leon Pike, quiet men who took their duties seriously. Marcus, the older one, had a scar along his jawline that looked like a pale thread. Leon was younger, with dark eyes that missed nothing. They walked the property each night, checking the gates, watching for anyone who didn't belong. I learned the rhythm of the house quickly. In the mornings, I brought my uncle his tea, 2 cubes of sugar, never one. In the afternoons, I managed his mail and sorted his financial papers, which were always written in neat, careful handwriting. At first, I thought of it all as work, but slowly it became devotion. The more I served him, the more I felt like I had a purpose again. He wasn't affectionate, but he was fair. He trusted me with things no one else knew, where the safe was hidden, how to reset the alarm codes, and which accounts were tied to which properties. Every Thursday, Beatrice Cole, his lawyer, came by in her navy suit and carried stacks of files in a leather case. She was brisk and precise, the kind of woman who never wasted words. On Fridays, Dr. Martin Pike, Leon's older brother, stopped in to check Uncle Rupert's blood pressure and talk about his health, which was strong for a man of 75. Occasionally, on quiet Sundays, a friend named Clara Voss would visit. Clara was a poet from London, now living in New York City, and she filled the house with laughter that echoed through the halls. She told stories of art galleries in Europe, of vineyards in France and the fog over the Thames, and sometimes I would close my eyes and imagine standing there, free and far away. I often think the house itself changed me. It taught me patience, order, and silence. The days were long, but the peace was deeper than anything I had ever known. At night, I would sit by the window in my small attic room, watching the lights from the riverboats flicker like stars in the distance. I'd whisper my thoughts into the dark, telling the house everything I couldn't tell anyone else. How I missed having a family, how I feared becoming invisible, how I wondered if my parents ever thought of me. But the house didn't let me feel sorry for long. There was always work to be done, and Uncle Rupert depended on me more each year. Sometimes, when I brought him his evening tea, he would look at me with an expression that almost resembled pride. "You've become part of this place, Lila," he said once. "Alder Lane breathes easier with you here." I carried those words for years. They meant more to me than any apology my parents could ever give. It wasn't always easy. The winters in Providence were bitter and long. The pipes froze, the power flickered, and the wind howled through the eaves like a restless ghost. I learned to fix the leaks myself, to keep the fires going, to negotiate with repairmen who always overcharged women. I grew strong without meaning to. I learned to stand alone, to manage accounts, to read people's faces the way my uncle read contracts. In those early years, money didn't matter to me. I knew Uncle Rupert was wealthy. His estate stretched far beyond the house, with holdings in Boston, Chicago, and even London, but I never thought any of it would touch me. I was simply his helper, his niece who stayed when everyone else left. Still, I began to sense that the house was shaping my future. There was something permanent about it, something that whispered, "You belong here." I felt it when I polished the silver, when I heard the steady tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, when I walked through the gardens at dawn and saw the mist curling over the roses. Looking back now, I realized that those years on Alder Lane were preparing me for everything that came later, the inheritance, the confrontation, the moment I finally understood what loyalty costs. But at the time, I was only a young woman with calloused hands and quiet dreams, living in a great old house with a man who trusted me, and that was enough. The years after I came to Alder Lane passed quietly, like pages turning in a thick old book. Time didn't rush there. It drifted, steady and slow, carrying me deeper into the rhythm of my uncle's world. By the time I turned 30, the house no longer felt like a stranger's estate. It felt like the spine of my own story. The river below our hill had become my companion, the walls my comfort, and Uncle Rupert my only family. He grew older, though I hardly noticed it at first. His stride shortened, his shoulders bent, and his eyes, once so sharp they could pierce through a lie, began to cloud with age. Still, he kept his mind alert. He read the newspaper every morning, marking the edges of the Wall Street Journal with a red pen, muttering at the foolishness of new businessmen who chased wealth faster than they could hold it. I would bring him breakfast, scrambled eggs, 2 slices of toast, and a single cup of black coffee, and he would nod without looking up, his eyes darting across the print. As the years passed, my responsibilities multiplied. I drove him to the market in Newport, where he insisted on picking the fruit himself. "Never trust hands you can't see," he used to say, lifting apples and tapping them with his knuckle before setting them in the basket. When he was tired, I read aloud from his favorite books, old volumes about American history, European art, and the quiet discipline of business. In those moments, I saw a softer side of him, hidden beneath decades of pride and solitude. We had few visitors, and I liked it that way. Beatrice Cole, his lawyer, continued her Thursday visits, her shoes clicking against the marble hallways like a metronome. She was a woman of control, her hair always pinned tight, her tone clipped but not unkind. She often looked at me with something between curiosity and admiration, though we rarely spoke beyond business. "You keep this house better than any staff we've hired," she said once. "He trusts you." Then there was Clara Voss, the poet from New York. She came less often now. Her gallery tours in Europe kept her away, but when she did visit, she filled the house with color. She would arrive in long scarves and talk about Paris and Florence, describing the light that painted the old cathedrals and the voices that rose from the streets. Uncle Rupert liked her company. She reminded him of the world beyond Alder Lane. But when she left, the silence returned like a tide. I didn't mind the quiet. I had long ago accepted that solitude was not loneliness, it was peace. Still, There were nights when I would catch my reflection in the window and wonder how my life had become so small. I had no family, no friends outside the gates, no dreams that stretched beyond the property line. But I did not resent it. In serving my uncle, I found purpose. One spring afternoon, when the air smelled of rain and lilacs, Beatrice asked me to join her and my uncle in the study. The room felt heavy that day. The curtains were drawn, and the desk was covered in folders and sealed envelopes. My uncle sat behind the desk, his cane resting against the chair, his face pale but calm. I could tell from the look in his eyes that something final was coming. "Lila," he said softly, "you've given me 15 years of your life. You've kept my house, my affairs, and my dignity intact. I could never repay you for that." I started to speak, but he lifted a hand. "Let me finish. I have made my last will and testament. Beatrice has prepared everything." The lawyer opened a file and placed it before him. My uncle's handwriting, elegant and exact, covered the first page. "This estate," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "is valued at $80 million. It includes the house, the land, and every account tied to my name. I am leaving all of it to you, Lila." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room blurred around me. "To me?" I whispered. "Uncle, I don't need." He cut me off again, his gaze firm. "You've earned it, child. You gave me loyalty when everyone else gave me excuses. You served without asking for anything in return. That is worth more than blood." Beatrice nodded once, her pen tapping against the edge of the document. "It's all signed and sealed. No one can contest it." I stared at the will, at the black ink that spelled my name beside numbers so large they barely seemed real. $80 million. I couldn't even imagine what that looked like in a single place. My throat tightened. I wanted to thank him, but no words came. Instead, I placed my hand over his, the skin thin and cool under my palm. He smiled, a faint, tired smile that said everything. That summer, his health declined quickly. He spent most days on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the river drift by. I stayed close to him, reading aloud until he dozed off. Some nights, I thought I heard him talking to his late sister, my mother, murmuring half-remembered arguments and regrets. I never interrupted. I just kept the lamps burning low and listened to the house settle into silence. By autumn, the air had turned sharp and the trees along Alder Lane burned gold. On a cold October morning, I went to wake him and found him still in his chair, eyes closed, the faintest smile frozen on his face. The teacup beside him was cold. I knew, even before I touched him, that he was gone. The funeral was small, just me, Beatrice, Marcus, Leon, and Clara, who flew in from London carrying a wreath of white lilies. We buried him under the maple tree behind the house, the one that turned crimson every fall. Clara read a short poem about loyalty and silence. I barely heard it. My hands were trembling too hard to hold the flowers steady. After everyone left, I walked alone back up the hill to the house. The wind pushed at the porch swing, and the boards groaned under my feet. I touched the porch rail, then the brass handle of the front door. Inside, the house was utterly still, as if it too had stopped to grieve. I walked into the study, the room where I had served tea, read letters, and received the news that would change my life. The afternoon light spilled across the desk, illuminating the neat stacks of books he had left behind. I placed my hand on the polished wood and whispered, "I will protect this place." It wasn't just a promise, it was a vow. That night, I sat by the window of my attic room, the same room I had lived in for 15 years. I thought of how far I had come, from the girl abandoned in Vermont to the woman who now owned an empire built by loyalty and work. Outside, the river shimmered under the moonlight, and I felt something inside me shift. For the first time, I wasn't just a servant. I wasn't just a niece. I was the keeper of Alder Lane, the guardian of a legacy worth $80 million, and more than that, the only person who truly understood what this house meant. As I drifted asleep, I thought I heard my uncle's voice one last time, soft and steady. "Take care of it, Lila. Take care of yourself." And I promised him I would. News travels faster than one ever expects, especially in America, where people measure worth by headlines and whispers. When the story of Uncle Rupert's passing and my inheritance spread through Providence, I didn't think much of it. The lawyers had handled everything with discretion. The documents were sealed, and my name wasn't meant to appear in the papers. But secrets, especially those wrapped in money, never stay hidden for long. It was early summer when they came back, my parents. I hadn't seen Donna or Frank West in 15 years. Not once had they written or called. I used to imagine how it would feel to see them again, but when the moment arrived, it felt like watching strangers act out a play I'd already seen too many times. The day was warm, and the house shimmered in the noon sun. Marcus and Leon were on duty by the gates, and I was on the porch, sipping iced tea and reviewing estate papers that Beatrice had sent. I remember the low hum of an engine breaking the quiet, and then the flash of a silver car pulling up the gravel drive, a sleek, expensive thing with Georgia plates. They must have rented it just for the occasion, thinking appearances would matter to me now. When the doors opened, the past stepped out, all dressed in cheap glamour. My mother wore a floral dress too young for her, her hair bleached and curled, her face painted to hide the years. My father wore a wrinkled suit that didn't fit, his tie loose, his grin wide and hollow. They waved as though they'd been invited. "Lila," my mother called, her voice rising with false sweetness. "My darling girl." I didn't move. I watched them from the porch, the same way you might watch a storm forming on the horizon, inevitable, but distant. Marcus tensed beside the gate. Leon took a step forward, hand near his holster. They didn't stop. My parents pushed through the gate, ignoring the guard's warning. My father's voice echoed across the lawn, loud and unashamed. "We heard the news, sweetheart. We have become rich. You are our beloved daughter." Something inside me went cold. 15 years of silence, 15 years of being invisible, and suddenly they remembered I existed because of $80 million. They rushed toward the porch, arms open, like the last decade and a half had been a misunderstanding we could laugh about. Leon and Marcus stepped in front of them, their presence quiet but firm. My father's grin faltered, though he tried to keep it. "Come now, we're family," he said, glancing between them. "We just want to talk." I stood, setting my glass down carefully. I walked to the edge of the porch and looked down at them. The sight of their faces made my heart ache, not from love, but from memory. I remembered the nights I waited for them to come home, the empty plates, the unanswered letters. The years I spent cleaning another man's house because mine had no room for me. "You came all this way to talk?" I said softly. My mother clasped her hands, her painted smile trembling. "We made mistakes, Lila. Terrible mistakes. We were young and scared, and we didn't know what we had. But we love you, truly. We always have." My father nodded eagerly. "That's right. We've been struggling, you know. Life's been hard. But when we heard how well you've done, how generous your uncle was, well, we're proud. So proud." The words stung in their emptiness. I felt Marcus shift beside me, waiting for my signal. I took a deep breath. "You weren't proud when you left me with nothing," I said. "You weren't proud when I slept in an attic and scrubbed floors just to survive. You didn't love me then, and you don't love me now. You love the money." My mother's smile cracked. "That's not true. Enough." My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't stop. "You abandoned me. You only remember I exist now because you think I'll hand you a piece of what you threw away." They froze. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The wind rustled through the oaks, and somewhere far off, the river whispered against the rocks. Then my father stepped forward again, desperation creeping into his tone. "Lila, please. We're still your parents. We made mistakes, yes, but we're family. You can't turn your back on that." I looked at him, the man who once shouted that I was a burden, who sold my childhood piano for beer money. I looked at the woman who had turned away when I cried for help. And I realized then that I owed them nothing. I turned slightly to Marcus and Leon. My voice was steady, almost calm. "Kick them out." For a heartbeat, Marcus hesitated, his eyes flicking between us. He'd seen me through every season of grief, and I think he wanted to be sure I meant it. I nodded once. He understood. They moved forward together, taking each of my parents by the arms. My mother gasped. "Lila, no," she cried, struggling weakly. My father cursed under his breath, pulling against Marcus's grip. The guards were firm, but not cruel. They walked them back down the drive, their shoes scuffing the gravel, their protests fading into the sound of the wind. At the gate, my father turned, face flushed and angry. "You think this money makes you better than us?" he shouted. "You're still our daughter. You'll regret this." I stood tall on the porch, the house rising behind me like a fortress. "No," I said clearly. "I regret ever waiting for you." Leon opened the gate. The guards guided them outside. My mother sobbed, clinging to the fence for a moment before Marcus pried her hand away. Then the gate slammed shut. The silence that followed was enormous. I could hear the cicadas in the trees, the faint hum of their car engine as it started. They lingered on the road for a few seconds, then drove off, leaving behind a trail of dust that shimmered in the afternoon light. I stayed on the porch long after they were gone. My heart was pounding, but beneath it was a strange calm, like a storm that had finally broken. For years, I had imagined this confrontation. I thought it would bring me sorrow or rage, but instead, it brought peace. Inside, the house was cool and still. I walked through the hallway, touching the banister, the walls, the familiar things that had shaped my life. This house had witnessed my loneliness, my service, my inheritance, and now my freedom. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window in my uncle's old study, watching the moonlight spill over the river. I thought about my parents somewhere out there, maybe in a cheap motel, cursing my name. I wondered if they would ever understand that money could not buy back what they had thrown away. When dawn came, I opened the windows and let the light in. The air smelled of dew and oak. I whispered softly to the empty room, "I don't even want to see you anymore. You will die poor like this." It wasn't anger, it was finality. The house seemed to breathe with me then, the old timbers groaning in approval, as if my uncle himself were there, nodding. I had protected his legacy, and in doing so, I had claimed my own. Alder Lane was mine. My peace was mine. My story, finally, was my own. After that day, peace didn't come easily. Even with the gates closed and the road quiet, I could still hear their voices echoing in my mind, pleading, shouting, calling me daughter as though the word could erase the years they had abandoned me. But I had learned long ago that words without loyalty meant nothing. I knew they would try to return, so I built a system to ensure they never could. The first step was legal. Beatrice Cole, ever efficient, helped me file the necessary orders with the court. We established firm restrictions, no unauthorized visits, no claims on the property, no chance for manipulation. Every letter from my parents' lawyers was returned unopened, stamped denied by owner's authority. The estate was locked tighter than the gates around it. Beatrice called it protection. I called it peace. Next came the physical measures. I ordered Marcus and Leon to strengthen the perimeter. We installed new cameras, upgraded the alarms, and built a second fence beyond the first, this one lined with motion sensors and floodlights that could turn night into day. The gates were rewired to open only by a private code, one known to me alone. Anyone who approached without permission would be seen, recorded, and turned away before they even reached the porch. I made the rules clear. No visitor entered the grounds without my written consent. The house itself also changed. I restored it room by room, investing nearly $500,000 into preserving what my uncle had built. The woodwork was refinished, the broken tiles replaced, and the great library, once dim with age, was given new light and care. I filled the shelves with books on finance, law, and history, determined to understand every world my uncle had once mastered. The more I learned, the stronger I felt. But I didn't hoard the money. My uncle had taught me that wealth was responsibility, not indulgence. I set aside $3 million to create the Rupert Hale Foundation, a trust dedicated to funding small-town libraries and art programs for girls who, like me, had been left behind. Each year, I traveled quietly to oversee the grants. I wore simple clothes and used only my initials on paperwork. I never let the donors or recipients know who I truly was. They didn't need to. It was enough to know that somewhere in America, a girl could open a door to learning because of what I built. Still, my parents never stopped trying. At first, they called the estate office, pleading, begging, pretending to be repentant. When the calls went unanswered, they sent letters, dozens of them, written in shaky hands. I never read them, though I kept them in a locked drawer for record-keeping. Then came the appearances. Once, they stood across the street from the estate gate in Albany, waving as if I might rush to greet them. Another time, when I traveled to Denver for a meeting, they somehow found the hotel and waited in the lobby. And later, in Santa Fe, they appeared again, older, thinner, desperate. I walked past them without a word. They called after me, their voices cracking, but I didn't turn. I had been their shadow once, unseen and unimportant. Now I was a woman with a key, a ledger, and a voice. I had built walls not out of hatred, but survival. Every rule, every fence, every order was a declaration. You cannot hurt me anymore. At night, when the estate quieted, I often sat on the porch with Clara Voss, who visited whenever her work brought her back from Europe. We would sip tea and watch the river lights ripple against the dark water. She'd talk about Paris exhibitions and the poems she was writing, and I would listen, feeling the cool air brush against my face. One night she told me, "You've built your own kingdom here, Lila. Not of gold, but of strength." I smiled at that. She was right. The house that had once belonged to my uncle now lived under my care, and though it still creaked in the night, the sound no longer frightened me. It felt alive, faithful, watchful, like an old friend standing guard. I no longer dreamed of forgiveness. Some wounds don't need healing. They need boundaries. I kept the system strong and my uncle's legacy intact. The guards were loyal, the accounts balanced, the trust secure. I paid every worker on time, in clean American dollars, and treated them with the same respect my uncle had shown me. Sometimes, when the wind rose off the river and rattled the shutters, I thought I heard my uncle's voice whispering through the halls, "You kept your word, Lila." And I would whisper back, "I protected our house, Uncle. I kept my word." Then I would close the curtains, turn off the lights, and sleep peacefully, knowing that the gates were locked, the alarm set, and my heart, at last, was safe.